that dams along the Columbia River have on endangered fish populations.
Salmon in the Columbia Basin are in deep trouble.
A $9 billion crisis is unfolding on one of America's most important rivers. The Columbia River powers millions of homes across the Pacific Northwest. Its dams control water, generate electricity, and support entire communities. But now, that system is starting to break down. New federal rulings are forcing operators to release more water, lowering reservoirs, reducing power generation, and putting massive pressure on aging infrastructure. Why? To save a species that's been here far longer than the dams: Chinook salmon. And that's where the conflict begins, because every drop of water sent downstream to help salmon survive is energy lost, money lost, and stability lost for the region. Billions of dollars in repairs are already overdue. Power grids are under strain, and communities along the river are starting to feel the impact. So this isn't just about a river, it's about a system built to control nature, now being forced to give some of that control back. The question is, can the Columbia River support both modern society and the ecosystem it replaced, or is something going to give? The cascade of mandates. The Columbia is often called the backbone of the Northwest, a river shaped by the ambition of the last century. Its waters redirected through concrete to illuminate cities and feed fields. The arrival of the dam system transformed the region, birthing towns, electrifying distant valleys, and providing steady water even in the driest of times. Forests and grasslands, once governed by spring floods and summer droughts, gave way to orchards and vineyards, their fate tied to the delicate calibration of gates and turbines. The system, a multi-billion-dollar engine, depends on a precarious equilibrium. Keep enough water behind the dams for power and agriculture, and enough flowing for fish, navigation, and the river's natural rhythms. But a new order has unsettled those routines. In a federal court in Oregon, the fate of the river has changed, not with a turning of the valve, but with the stroke of a gavel. Decades of disappearing salmon runs have led a judge to require dam operators, those overseeing the John Day, McNary, Bonneville, and other mainstays of the system, to abandon once stable playbooks. The decision is clear. More water must be released, reservoir levels can't rise above strict thresholds, and the hope for Chinook and other salmon must take priority. This means a kind of controlled abundance, a paradox at the center of the crisis. Engineering teams accustomed to conserving water for drought or power are now obliged to let it spill, daily and sometimes unpredictably, over and beyond the concrete that tamed it. For the first time since the Columbia was domesticated, management is dictated first by the needs of nature, with human priorities relegated to second place. Decades of forecasts and optimization models must now answer to changing environmental goals, as threatened salmon become the top concern across the river's basin. One new requirement often triggers another. With reservoirs capped at 2025 operating levels, the entire dam system enters uncharted territory. Repairs at McNary and Bonneville have been postponed for years, and now courts have barred the usual reservoir drawdowns that engineers rely on for critical maintenance. Instead, aging turbines and weathered concrete face rising pressures as flows swing unpredictably. The results are beginning to show: corroding anchor bolts, gradual cracks in spillways, turbines increasingly taxed by erratic flows, all signs of the cost of waiting too long. The sense of control that once defined Columbia River management is itself eroding, bit by bit. Each new regulation ripples through the agencies and corporations that oversee the river. Even the river masters, expert in squeezing value from every cubic meter, find their expertise challenged by the evolving matrix of legal and ecological priorities. What was once just how things worked is now suddenly and urgently up for debate. Is the new regime a stopgap, a temporary adaptation to crisis, or does it mark the beginning of a new era, one that admits the river's power to resist our designs and the limits of our desire for control? Salmon or steel? The price of survival. For the Quinault and other tribal communities whose stories are tied to the Columbia, the consequences are counted not simply in revenue or shortages, but in the survival of cultural memory itself. The Chinook salmon, king of the river, returns each year to bind past and future in a cycle as enduring as the currents that shape the valley. The return of the salmon marks the seasons and underpins ceremonies stretching back generations. Now, as the courts intervene and engineers recalibrate, the question of the salmon's survival has become a public contest, a struggle between technology and tradition, steel and scale, turbine and fin. Operators monitor and adjust spill levels in real time, caught between the requirements to meet the region's energy needs and the obligation to provide the right flows for fish. Each cubic meter released for salmon is a loss of potential power, a factor that ripples out in increased operating costs, possible rate hikes, and extended repair needs. The salmon are tested by more than dams, of course. Declining snowpacks, shifting ocean conditions, and rising temperatures challenge even the boldest migration. The juvenile salmon, or smolts, have to time their passage just right. Too late, and they may not survive the heat and low oxygen. Too early, and they may not be strong enough for the journey to the Pacific. Even as more water spills, salmon face continuing obstacles: predators, warm stretches of river, and altered habitats. Each sustained or experimental change in spill and flow patterns brings hope, but also uncertainty. Will increased flows cool the riverbank for fry, or will it strain turbines, adding to the system's fragility? Every salmon that appears at a fish ladder or is counted by observers offers cause for guarded optimism, even as the broader picture remains deeply uncertain. Meanwhile, debates over the possibility of building a new dam on one of Washington's last free-flowing rivers have triggered warnings. How many more obstacles can the river and its salmon bear before too much is lost? As turbines slow and repairs mount, the river's pulse is keenly felt up and down its length. Can even a $9 billion investment, if it arrives, restore what has slipped away? Or is the new era one of constant trade-offs, with partial victories and shared losses? A system stretched thin. High above the river, satellites register slow changes invisible to those working the water: falling reservoir surfaces, shifting channel sandbars, unseen volumes slipping away. The emergency, though quiet, is becoming evident. With court orders keeping reservoirs low to improve fish passage, the Columbia's multiple missions, flood management, irrigation, energy, transportation, run closer to their limits. Lower water diminishes turbine efficiency. It exacerbates silt buildup and threatens essential machinery. River stretches, once easily navigable, now strand vessels during the wrong tides or times of year. Those working along the river have already noticed changes. Navigation markers flash on rocks that haven't surfaced in years, barge traffic slows as water levels challenge old routes, and grain elevators occasionally stand idle as shipping windows close. Mechanical repairs at McNary and Bonneville stand in line behind legal restrictions. Drawdowns are forbidden, so crews can't expose needed foundations. Waiting risks further damage, cracks propagate, machinery ages, all while long-term demand builds for both water and power. The human toll filters outward. Eastern Washington's farms rely on careful releases to keep their land green, and every new adjustment in the canal system is watched anxiously. Industrial users balance water allocations as costs of delay or shortage rise. Families in both city and country experience the undercurrent of concern. How stable is the grid? Will the water come? With each season, the system's margin for error narrows further, and the $9 billion bill grows, not merely for costly repairs, but in the lost generations of wild fish, idle turbines, and crops that fall for lack of water. How does a region founded on abundance adapt when scarcity and constraint become the new normal? and every part of the machine, ecological, economic, cultural, shows the strain at once. Rising tensions, colliding futures across the Columbia Basin, facts settle like silt. Tribes recall the untamed river and its vast salmon migrations. Towns remember power shortages and drought. Engineers track small but accumulating faults. Environmentalists measure every missing fish. Industrial planners tally energy and water as costs inch upward. The recent court orders, celebrated by some and considered disruptive by others, deepen regional divides. The new legal regime demands shared sacrifice. Confidence in the recovery of salmon remains uncertain, while businesses and energy planners warn of possible shortfalls in power and water security. Those who find hope in the returning salmon also acknowledge forces outside the dams: warming waters, shifting climate, unpredictable ocean returns that could endanger recovery efforts. Those seeking security in power and commerce worry about more frequent shortages and outages. Every meeting, whether around a farm table or in a boardroom, circles back to questions of trust and shared purpose. The intertwined fates of the region's communities are unmistakable. Decisions for fish in one stretch mean less water for farmers elsewhere, and reduced output for the energy grid may ripple as lost jobs and higher bills. Meanwhile, an ongoing debate over proposals for new dams on the last remaining wild rivers in the state brings together a combustible mix of conservationists, tribal governments, sportsmen, and locals, each wary the next project could tip the system past any point of restoration. Water rights, regional treaties, and compacts remain delicate. One misstep by any party could reverberate far beyond the Columbia, shaping water politics for much of the West. Within these clashes lies a deeper uncertainty. Can the river's benefits be shared, or will the failure to cooperate bring lasting damage? Ecosystems lost, economies destabilized, and communities forever altered. Lessons written in water history speaks quietly but insistently from the riverbanks and in records kept by earlier generations. The Columbia's present is the culmination of ambition, hope, and countless compromises, the result of decades of dreams for power, food, and a secure future. Every monument, turbine, and treaty codifies a desire to capture the river's bounty, but each is limited by nature's rules. Floods, drought, and now climate change all test the system's design, reminding us that the river only ever lent its strength. Even the largest dams come close to their limits in flood years. In drought, navigation and irrigation shrink away. Management has always been a dynamic balance, with no guarantee that the combination of legal, technological, and political tools will be enough to keep pace with shifting conditions. The current crisis echoes older warnings. Delayed maintenance exposes the infrastructure to decay. New scientific insights and legal rulings require changes faster than planners can adapt. Climate change, reducing snowpack and prolonging drought, places yet further strain on a system never intended to operate under these new extremes. What was built as an engine of surplus now becomes a system of difficult choices, with every solution tied to new risks. Looking back reveals that such reckonings are not new. Every era of Columbia management has faced its own period of doubt and adjustment. Yellowed engineering maps record moments when design choices were rushed or warnings disregarded. The challenge now is greater, as climate change accelerates natural fluctuations and exposes the old myth of endless abundance. The $9 billion bill is not simply the price of repairs. It is also the cost of hard lessons learned too late, of freedoms taken for granted, of a river asked to serve all needs at once. Can we learn, finally, the complex lesson that every gain is shadowed by a loss, every act of control only provisional?
Echoes downstream. Not all signs of crisis are found in lawsuits or conference rooms. Some drift quietly on the water, accumulating on gravel bars and lingering in pools. Before dawn, fishermen cast lines in hope, recalling stories of the river's past glory, the days when salmon crowded the shallows from bank to bank. For the region's tribes, the losses cannot be easily measured. The promise of restored fish protections is a step toward justice, though it cannot rewrite history or heal all wounds. It brings, however, the hope that silence at the ladders is not forever. Elsewhere, the impact spreads in less visible ways. Commercial navigation grows riskier as old hazards, logs, rocks, sunken debris, re-emerge in the shallower waters. Barges, usually full with crops and timber, hesitate or idle, captains wary of their draft. This too reshapes local economies. Fewer shipments mean fewer jobs, as costs rise and the link between river and town weakens. The $9 billion estimate is not merely a financial figure, but accounts for time, tradition, and the uncertain future that so many families face. At what point do these changes demand a fundamental reinvention of entire communities? Will some be forced to transform, or will they gradually vanish, like the ghost towns of earlier eras, as the river finds its own path? A new uncertainty, the river writes its own rules. The Columbia's fate is more than a struggle over infrastructure or conservation. It is a reckoning between our expectations and what the river and its ecosystem can actually deliver. Court orders, legal mandates, and scientific recommendations now set the parameters for every decision. How much water to keep, how much to release, whose needs take precedence, whose can be postponed. With each new regulation, the system becomes more complex. Maintenance deferred is a bet that old machinery will endure another season, an increasingly hazardous gamble in a changing world. Erosion, once managed by precise reservoir levels, now threatens everything from foundations to fields as water is held back or released in new patterns. Every limitation amplifies the possibility of cascade effects. As margins for error narrow, the chances mount that a small problem somewhere in the system could set off a chain of larger failures. The Columbia River Treaty itself, once framed as a guarantee of cooperation and security between two nations, now stands at the edge of renewed tension, challenged by changing hydrology, law, and trust. Should we try to rewrite the rules to fit a new age? Is there a technological or legal solution robust enough to maintain the river's legacy without undermining it? Or does the Columbia, ever resistant to final mastery, reserve the last word? When water itself becomes the question. Crises are not always accompanied by alarms. Sometimes they arrive unannounced, the sum of many small failings accumulating beneath the surface. The Columbia's slow transformation is such a crisis. Its warning signs are invisible until they finally demand recognition. In the end, the story is about more than money or even the fate of salmon and treaty rights. It is about trust, the belief that technology, law, and geography will always deliver the familiar sense of security. Along the river, every action now carries a double meaning. To move forward is to risk, to slow down is to invite other dangers. No ruling, no machine, no treaty can conjure more water than the climate allows, nor can any authority reverse decades of choices made in other circumstances. The challenge, stark in its simplicity, is whether the region can adapt its demands and methods to fit the changing conditions of the river, to sustain energy, food, tradition, and community without exhausting the resources that allow them. As the waters fall and the reckoning approaches, the region's story, the story of the Columbia, is being written anew, its future shaped by the intertwined pressures of law, nature, and necessity. Those who care about the Columbia's fate now face a moment of truth, one that resonates far beyond this single watershed. For all its engineering and treaties, the river remains an untamed force, and its gifts are always balanced by the need for caution, care, and respect. What will be the next chapter? Renewal through cooperation, or hard-won lessons, learned again at great cost? As the water drops away and the uncertainty grows, the answers are left, as they always have been, to those willing to seek them, and to the river itself as it slips round the next slow bend out of sight.